While the United States was embroiled in its own trade wars, Canada made a decisive move in Europe. Trudeau met with NATO and EU leaders not to discuss military issues, but to promote something else: buying Canadian. It is a direct threat to U.S. producers in European markets. If Canada persuades NATO countries to change supply chains, it will redefine economic dominance across the Atlantic. Washington didn't anticipate this. And now the issue is Canada discreetly positioning itself as a trade alternative to the United States? Canada did not simply turn up to discuss policies. It came to make agreements. What's the pitch? Stop depending so heavily on U.S. suppliers. Choose Canada instead. Trudeau emphasized Canada's industrial, oil, and aerospace industries, pitching them as viable alternatives to European markets. At the heart of this is CETA, Canada's Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the European Union. If European corporations relocate only a percentage of their supply chains away from U.S. enterprises, Canada benefits while the United States' economic power fades. It's a basic technique, but it has huge repercussions. The United States has historically been the preferred economic partner of NATO partners, but Canada's current attempt jeopardizes that position. By providing competitive pricing, fewer trade barriers, and direct supplier relationships, Canada is making it simpler for European firms to diversify away from U.S. imports. If Europe begins to transfer its energy, technology, and industrial goods production to Canada, it reduces U.S. exports and, as a result, Washington's global trade influence. What's the actual question? How much of a shift would be required before the balance of economic power in NATO begins to alter? Was this a move that U.S. policymakers were expecting, or was Washington taken by surprise? Trade specialists are already discussing whether the United States overestimated Canada's capacity to establish itself as a transatlantic alternative. Right now, Washington is faced with a decision. Is there an economic pushback? Create additional incentives for European enterprises to stay within U.S. supplier networks? Or does it let Canada's power grow, knowing that any significant retaliation may turn into a trade war? Regardless, Canada's action requires the United States to reconsider its economic policy with NATO partners. This is more than simply one trade visit. It's part of a larger design. Canada is rapidly expanding its commercial partnerships beyond the United States, forging closer ties with Europe, Latin America, and even Asia. What is changing? Stronger trade agreements with Europe mean Canada isn't entirely reliant on U.S. arrangements. New energy exports establish Canada as a viable provider in global markets. The desire for trade diversification indicates that Canada intends to play a greater role in the global arena. If this trend continues, Canada may soon become more than just a U.S. trading partner. It might be a standalone force in international trade. Canada and the United States have long maintained one of the world's closest economic ties. However, instances like this raise the issue of whether Canada is abandoning that partnership or simply playing its cards more strategically. This is what we know. 75% of Canada's exports still go to the United States. The economic linkages are profound. Tariffs imposed by the United States and trade conflicts have prompted Canada to seek alternate markets. Canada is not splitting with Washington, but it is ensuring that it has influence. This is not about replacing the United States. It is about ensuring that Canada is not unduly dependent on any single trading partner. If the United States continues to apply economic pressure, Canada's new partnerships may evolve into lasting trade adjustments. That's when things become serious. If Europe was not interested, Canada's move would be ineffective. But what has been the response thus far? Surprisingly open. Why? Supply chain diversification. Europe has been striving to minimize its reliance on U.S. imports, particularly as trade tensions rise. Energy security. Canada's natural gas and oil exports provide a viable alternative to U.S. providers, which is critical as Europe seeks to stabilize its energy markets. Political strategy. Strengthening relations with Canada provides influence in future trade discussions with Washington and Beijing. European leaders aren't rushing into anything yet, but Canada's appeal is consistent with their long-term economic plan. If Canada can obtain these agreements, it gains a firmer presence in European markets, while the United States loses power in an area it has traditionally controlled. This is not only a political move, it is about real money, real trade, and real economic changes. Let's speak about concrete numbers. Thanks to CETA, commerce between Canada and the EU is already worth $119 billion yearly. Canada is one of the EU's top 10 trading partners, while the United States dominates in several areas. A relocation of just 5 to 10% of transatlantic imports from the United States to Canada would result in billions of dollars in economic effect. If Canada boosts its share of European commerce as the United States confronts tariff conflicts, it is more than a symbolic victory. It represents a significant economic change in transatlantic power. Washington understands this. The question is, how will it respond? For the time being, this is just economic, but it has NATO-wide ramifications. If Canada succeeds in improving its commercial position in Europe, other NATO nations may follow. Germany and France may expand trade agreements with Canada, lowering reliance on U.S. goods. Smaller NATO economies may seek better trade arrangements outside of Washington's shadow. The United States may have to negotiate harder to keep its share of transatlantic commerce. This is hardly a NATO crisis, but it does represent a potential shift in how NATO economies interact with one another. And if Washington perceives this as a challenge to its economic leadership, we may see a counter-move shortly. So, what comes next? Currently, Canada is testing the waters. However, if European governments begin to prefer Canadian producers, transatlantic commerce may undergo a significant realignment. Stronger Canada-Europe supply chains, undermining U.S. supremacy, a drive by Washington to balance Canada's power. We are reaching a tipping moment in trade partnerships. This might be a short-term plan, or it could be Canada establishing its own trading empire. The United States is not ignoring Canada's trade initiatives in Europe. The question is, how will Washington react? There are two potential paths. Counter Canada's influence by providing better trade incentives to its European partners. Apply economic pressure on Canada to maintain transatlantic supply lines centered on the United States. Both have hazards. If the U.S. presses too hard, it may drive more European corporations to Canada. If it doesn't respond, Canada may solidify its position as a growing trade adversary. Washington is currently keeping careful watch. But if Canada gains significant ground, anticipate a counter-move. Trade is rarely just business. It's all about alliances, influence, and long-term power. If Canada establishes greater commercial relations with Europe, it may pave the path for tighter links with European economies that shift away from U.S. suppliers. Stronger Canada-EU trade agreements that establish new global norms. A domino effect in which other NATO economies seek alternatives. For the time being, they are only preliminary steps. However, if Canada plays its cards well, it has the potential to establish a new economic power network that will transform global commerce. Is this just a one-time trade push? Is Canada laying the basis for a larger shift? This is what we know. Canada is not breaking off the United States, but it is seeking economic independence. If these new agreements are implemented, Canada will have stronger bargaining power in future trade discussions with the United States. If Washington retaliates, it may result in a long-term trade realignment. Currently, this is a test. However, if it works, expect significant changes in the near future. Canada's newest action is not only about trade, it is about who controls the supply networks that power the global economy. If Canada maintains its position as a stronger trading partner in Europe, we may witness a new transatlantic trade balance, with Canada playing a larger role and changing U.S. influence as European markets expand. a long-term transition that reduces Canada's reliance on Washington's economic policies. For the time being, this is a brave step. So what happens next? That depends on how the United States responds. Now for the actual question. Is Canada establishing itself as an independent trading power? Is this a planned strategy to put pressure on the United States? Will the United States try to maintain its transatlantic trade dominance? Or is a new power dynamic emerging right in front of us? Share your opinions in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to never miss our next deep dive into global power moves. Thank you for viewing and see you in the next one.